From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast. This is episode 527. I'm Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X. With me as always, my co-host Derek, DV3 in our forum, and DV3G and DV384 on X. Derek, good to be on here talking basketball gaming and basketball with you. With that being said, what are we talking about this week?
So we have three topics on the agenda. First, we will be discussing a new but familiar 2K controversy, this time involving a Kobe Bryant Season 6 Collector's Reward. Second, we will discuss Top Spin 2K25, another 2K title with familiar greed. Lastly, we will get to our main topic, which is the most overused words or terminology in basketball jargon, which was a topic suggestion from Kid Cash. So thank you for that topic suggestion, Kid Cash. But Andrew, this Kobe Bryant Season 6 reward controversy, let's get into that. Some pretty troubling behavior again by 2K.
Yeah, and not surprising at all, unfortunately. But this broke over last week by Herb Scribner of the Washington Post. He's been covering this issue closely all year with NBA 2K24 MyTEAM. And the top collector level reward was supposed to be a Kobe Bryant card coming in Season 6. This is something that was promised during the previous season. It still hasn't happened, even though we did reach Season 6 in April. It is wrapping up in about just under 2 weeks now from when this is going out, and it is still not available. And he's been trying to follow up on this, and it led to 2K finally releasing a statement that said as follows: players who achieve the top collector level will now receive an option pack for 2 picks out of 10 previously released 100 overall cards. We appreciate the players have dedicated time and effort throughout the year to achieve this reward, and 2K is committed to ensuring players continue to earn valuable content as their reward. Which, look, that is a big prize, obviously, 2 100 overall cards, which, as we've noted before, are very expensive to collect, to try and pull in packs, very rare odds. But this wasn't the reward that was promised at the beginning of the year. And this statement only came after Herb Scribner kept pushing for it. And finally they've made this statement, but gamers are understandably not happy.
So in order to pull a 100 overall card, they have been having the end user spend, so the consumer spend, upwards to thousands of dollars, Andrew. We talked about Troy Den's streams, other gamers in the community who were streaming pack openings and whatnot. And some of them were spending $1,000, $2,000, upwards to $4,000 opening packs trying to get one of these 100 overall players. Just absolutely filthy gambling mechanics in this game. So now with them pulling this Kobe Bryant reward, even though it was promised during preview season. But yeah, that was something that was promised to people before they bought the game. Like you said, it was promised during preview season. This is one of the reasons why some people could have been buying this game. It's another promise broken. It's another lie, and consumers absolutely deserve better. And I read a tweet from somebody in the basketball gaming community, and they said 2K had people grinding and spending countless dollars and an unbelievable amount of time on this game in order to get up to the collector level to achieve this feat of getting this Kobe reward, right? So they milked that and only announced the pull of that reward right up until it was going to be pulled. How scummy is that? They knew they were going to do this, right?
Oh yeah.
Like there's no way. Yeah, they've known for a while that they were going to do this, but they advertised it pre-release. And then they waited until the last minute to tell people, oh, nope, you're not getting that reward. Even though you've spent countless dollars on this mode, even though you've spent all of this time, yeah, you're not going to get it now. And, Herb Scribner also posted on May 2nd, 2024, and he says, NBA 2K did not mention its decision to change NBA 2K24's Ultimate Collector Reward in its most recent blog post today. So on May 2nd, they had a blog post, and it wasn't mentioned, 3 days after the change was first announced. The NBA 2K24 pre-order explainer still lists Kobe Bryant card as the collector level reward. So it was still listing it in the pre-order explainer. And then he goes on and says, earlier this week, 2K announced via Discord and in a statement to me that Bryant would no longer be the reward, causing an uproar from the community. Here's the other piece of that. I wouldn't be surprised if now they try to include that Kobe Bryant collector reward in a pack that they make people gamble for. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. And I said as much in my article last week. I mentioned that's probably what they're going to do. I've seen that speculation on Twitter, X. I absolutely agree with it. It seems just like the kind of move they would pull at this point. It is a bait and switch, as people have been saying. And it's, as you say, it's scummy to sell the game on that promise. I mean, obviously it's not the only thing they're selling the game on. We realize that. But you've very explicitly made this promise during the preview season that this Kobe Bryant card, your cover player, your player who has died tragically, and you are selling the game on his likeness, and you are pushing it on a celebration of Kobe. He's there with the historical challenge mode as well. You've got people, as you said, grinding, paying to collect the amount of cards to reach that top collector level.
Hold on. They don't celebrate Kobe. They don't celebrate any player or team. They celebrate money.
Well, that's true.
That's what they celebrate.
They certainly do celebrate the almighty dollar, for sure. But as you said, you have people spending money, grinding hard to reach the collector level, get that Kobe Bryant card when it drops, and very quietly they've substituted it with a different reward. Now, some people have said that this reward is better. There's 2 100 overall cards that are, as you noted, very expensive to pull. And in a way, getting 2 OP cards instead of just 1, sure, by quality, by quantity, if you will, that is a better reward. But it wasn't the reward people were promised. They wanted a Kobe card. It is, supposedly, a celebration of Kobe. It is what was promised during the previous season. It's the card they were expecting. And they've pulled this bait and switch at the last minute with very quiet announcements, which is very 2K, to not be forthcoming with their communication. So, yeah, it's just terrible all around. And I don't agree with the point that it's a better reward. That's not the point. The point is that it's been a bait and switch. It's not the reward people were expecting. And of course, the other defense that people have been throwing out there is, well, 2K does this, so really it's your fault. You shouldn't be surprised if they pull this. And look, I see the point. It certainly is true that we can't put this past 2K, but that doesn't make it right. That doesn't mean we shouldn't call it out, because this is scummy.
Yeah, so one of the comments under Herb's post was, this has to be a fine or violation somehow. They are legit still advertising Kobe as final reward in all stores. I'll say it again. I hope that at some point with these practices, somebody successfully takes 2K to court and wins, and we get to see the result. Because there's no way that they cover themselves on those disclaimers at the store, right? There's no way they're covering themselves with that advertising, with that, with the lie.
Well, they do terms of service. Stores. They do terms of service if you agree to that,
Well, no. That's when you turn on the game, Andrew.
Yeah.
Right? That's not at point of purchase.
Of course.
So they're lying. That's the point. Like they're getting people to spend their hard-earned money on this game based on lies, right? And it's too bad. And it's definitely not, unexpected, but this stuff just keeps getting worse and worse with these mechanics. And I wanted to bring this up. So Terrence Ross, former NBA player, he is a heavy gamer. In fact, he plays Top Spin 2K25 and he plays NBA 2K. And obviously he's in 2K as well. He has cards in MyTEAM. And on May 2nd, the same day that Herb made that post, he states, "What's up, 2K community? Are we done with MyTEAM?" And DBG responded, "Until change happens, then I don't see a reason for people to play it, to be honest." And Terrence Ross says, "What game are we migrating to next?" So he was ready to move on. And then this is telling. Now, this is a former NBA player, obviously a lifelong gamer and whatnot. Another user stated, "They need to understand I don't love that game. There are tons of better games. What I love is having a Kobe, an idol of mine, in the games with me. It is not that I do not like Glenn Rice. It is just that I want to play with Kobe. And if that doesn't happen soon, no more 2K." And then Terrence Ross's response to this was, "I blame the lack of competitiveness between brands. There's no other basketball game to force 2K to be innovative. They become so lax on pushing out whatever they want and ignore the people who play the game. They lost sight of what matters. That sounds like something you and I would say, Andrew.
Oh, yeah.
Terrence Ross is pissed. So basically what he wants is competition in the basketball gaming space. He blames a lot of 2K's, greedy practices, the stuff that they're able to get away with, the lackluster gameplay, the BS they pulled in MyTEAM. He's blaming part of that on lack of a competitor. And I completely agree. Nobody's keeping them honest. Nobody's doing it right. Nobody's, having gamers, or the majority of gamers, migrate to their game where it hurts 2K's bottom line. They've compromised the basketball gaming space in reality, and nobody else wants to get in that space. Or maybe they feel threatened, so they don't go into that space. But I thought that was incredibly telling. And then there was one more post, Andrew, from Splash, so at Splash Edition, states, "For those who don't understand, let me break it down. Imagine you were promised a reward all year from release date," which he uses the example of Kobe, and you relentlessly grind until April, and then they just basically change it because they feel like it. I truly hope any dev dealing with MyTEAM gets fired. So those are some pretty harsh words, but yeah, there are a lot of pissed people out there.
Rightfully so.
Right. And also even players who are in the game, like Terrence Ross. And this is not a good look for 2K.
Absolutely not. And it never is when they're actually battling with NBA players or former NBA players on social media. Absolutely. And you see some people expressing the hope that there can be some kind of legal action. But of course, to that point, that terms of service that we talked about before, if you're playing MyTEAM in NBA 2K24 at the moment, that means you have agreed to the updated terms of service. So 2K knew this was coming. This is why they're pulling all these moves to protect themselves against this legal action against scummy moves. Even more scummy moves than they've done in the past. And once again, people have been expecting that reward. There is that bait and switch. And there has been some speculation as to why they've done it, and there's a very good chance it's because they feel like it and because they can, obviously. There's been some speculation that I've seen that it might be a likeness issue. I don't know what that would be because Kobe is still in the game, so presumably they can use him on any card they wish in MyTEAM, at least until the end of...
No, Andrew, they found another way to make more money.
That's right, yeah.
That's the only logical explanation. I mean, Kobe's been in the game. They've had the license. There's absolutely, they don't have to put in hard work to change attributes, ratings, badges, the art for the card, anything like that. Like, the only logical explanation is that they found another way to make money by removing it. That's the only logical explanation. I'm sorry. I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt at all. There's no excuse to pull something like this after it was announced pre-order. And here's the funny part. This is so typical of 2K now, of Take-Two. Just not only just waiting till the last minute, but like they had that blog on May 2nd, not even mentioning it.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Not giving a shout out. Not even saying, we apologize to our gamers about this. Not saying, saying nothing about it, trying to keep it as quiet as possible while they screw people over. And I'm honestly sick of it.
And I drew comparisons to the Pink Diamond situation with NBA 2K19. And the funny thing is that they were actually kind of in the right in that situation, so much as that code that leaked was not supposed to leak. It was not supposed to be a universal code, but they tried to handle it very quietly, removing it from people's accounts without announcing it until they were called on it because people used consumables on that card that they got. And on Christmas Day as well. They couldn't let it slide on Christmas Day. They fixed it immediately. They'll drag their feet on any other issues that affect gamers and the value for money that gamers are getting, VC earning issues and so forth. So it was just a terrible look. Even when they were kind of in the right on a situation, they still ended up looking bad. And you're right. The only explanation that makes sense is that they're trying to milk gamers for even more money. Because, again, they have Kobe's likeness rights. He's in the game already. There's seemingly no reason that they couldn't put him on any card they wish. And even if there was, let's even for a second entertain that absurd possibility. You've got to come out and say something. Maybe you don't go into the whole process of negotiations because that makes it look like you're putting pressure on his estate or something, if that was the issue. But you make some kind of statement ahead of time. You don't try and cover it up. You put out the statement.
I don't want to hear that. Yeah, but I don't want to hear that though, because they already have Kobe in the game on rosters represented otherwise.
Sure.
Like I don't like there can't be, it doesn't, there's no logical explanation why they would do that for based on license, in my opinion. I would be absolutely shocked.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. But even if it was, you put out a statement. If there is some issue that's holding it back, apart from that, some legitimate issue, you put out a statement that says, we are sorry about this situation. We are sorry to change the reward. Something has come up. We are working on it. If you are working on it, obviously, to make it up to our fan base, we are making this substitution for 2 100 overall cards, 2 picks out of 10 of previously released cards. And as people have noted, that's not including the Yao Ming 100 overall that has been recently released. So it's not all of the 100 overall cards, it's 10 of the 11 so far. So even one that you may want, if you want a Yao Ming card, you can't get that. But yeah, not putting out that statement is very 2K. It is very on brand for them. And just that lack of communication. It's just, on top of everything else, not having the decency to address the situation as much as they can. Let's say there was a legal issue of some kind, not necessarily a likeness issue, but some kind of legal issue. Maybe you can't go into detail about what it is, but you can't even put out a statement that acknowledges it, apologizes for it, and gives some kind of explanation. No, it's on top of everything else. It's just terrible.
So now I'm going to get into the Top Spin 2K25 controversy, and we just went on a rant about the BS they're pulling with NBA 2K. Don't think that 2K games did our consumers any favors with this new tennis release. And there are, once again, 3 versions, just like the NBA game. The regular version of Top Spin 2K25, $59.99. Top Spin 2K25 Deluxe Edition, $99.99. And Top Spin 2K25 Grand Slam Edition, $119.99. And of course, right in front of you, right on Steam, it says items available for this game, $99.99 for 16,000 VC. $19.99 for 2,700 VC, etc. So they're putting the VC right in your face. And from what I'm reading, so this is getting mixed reviews. From what I am reading, your player absolutely sucks and is absolutely terrible to use right out of the gate.
We ever heard that
super
before?
Slow, hit super slow, can't compete at all. Why? Because they want you to buy the deluxe edition, right? For the VC, the Grand Slam edition. They want you, and if you don't, they want you to realize that you can't compete out there. And whether it be in the career mode, which we're going to get into in a second, or against another human being. So they're going to want you to spend the money on VC that they advertise heavily as well. Just like 2K, they make your player suck right out of the gate, right?
Yep.
But I also find tennis games harder to hide in. Why? Because it's just you versus somebody else. It's singles, right? That's what everybody plays. So you can't choose in a tennis game, you can't choose like a slow big guy like you can in basketball and just kind of like hang around the paint and sometimes positively impact the game, right?
Exactly.
In a tennis game, you one-on-one, and if you suck and if you're slow and you hit terribly, what's going to happen? You are going to get creamed. You're never going to win a match. You're never going to progress. You're never going to want to connect with anybody online. So you're going to want to buy VC because you're going to need to pump up your player, right? So that's number one. Number two, this absolutely pisses me off to no end. Please be aware that the career mode, which is solo, is bound to online. So permanent connection required. That's what it states. Permanent connection required to play the career mode. And 2K plans on shutting down the game servers at the end of 2026, which is in their disclaimer, December 31st, 2026. You're purchasing a game for $60 plus that is planned to not even be playable for most of its content in 2 years. I can't even tell you how scummy that is. That makes this game disposable, right? Most people buy these tennis games for 2 reasons. 1, the online connection to play with other people. 2, the career mode, right? The majority of this game is going to be completely unplayable at the end of 2026 or earlier, depending on what the company does, because they decided to make their career mode 100% dependent on an online connection. And the piece of this that sucks is because if you go back, 14, 15 years ago when Topspin 4 was released, I can still go on there and play a career, Andrew, right? I can still play the career mode. Also, another thing with this game is that the graphics are worse in many ways than PS3 gen Topspin 4. The body styles, body types, the fabric on the clothing, the faces and everything. It really feels like these games are turning into rush jobs, money grabs, and super disposable titles, right? So if you look at the Steam reviews for this game, it states always online. These are a couple of reviews. Always online single player with de novo. These developers should be thrown in prison. That was one of the popular comments. 105 people found this review helpful. Can't play career offline. Refunded. 96 people found this helpful. Everything outside of the gameplay is lackluster. This game is not worth even $49.99, and he just goes on a rant talking about all the issues with this game, the predatory mechanics, the exclusively online career mode, all of that. So they don't think it stops with their basketball title, with the NBA 2K series. They are doing the exact same thing with Topspin, their new tennis game, and it sucks.
And of course, they're doing similar things with the WWE 2K series as well. It is what Take-Two does across their entire range at this point. And it's very cheeky that they're doing that. Cheeky is the nicest word I can use here, that there is actually competition in that space. There are other tennis games, basketball games, NBA games. You can get away with it. They are getting away with it because, as Terence Ross said, as we have said so many times, there's no competition. There's no alternative. That even if there's an inferior alternative on the sticks, even if there's an NBA Live that's not quite as good on the sticks, not quite as deep as far as its franchise mode or its some of its gameplay mechanics, it's still solid, it's still fun, it's still fairer to the gamer. And make no mistake, if EA were in a position to milk people for recurrent revenue in NBA Live, they would absolutely be doing that. I mean, look what EA is doing with other games. There are no, or certainly very few, AAA publishers that I would trust at this point in time, but 2K has certainly taken it to a new level, and people say, oh, it's the price of game development and everything else. No, this money goes to the suits' pockets. This is very well documented. We have said it many times before. Many people have said this. It still somehow gets swept under the rug by shills and apologists. It's disgusting to see. And even if they didn't have the pushy recurrent revenue mechanics, which they obviously do, the fact that you can't play a single-player mode offline, that there's no offline version of it as there used to be. Look how much fun I'm still having with 2K14 My Career, the offline version of that, Derek. It is possible to do that, and that was originally a connected mode. So it's not like it's technologically impossible. So yeah, it just comes down to greed.
Yeah, I also want to point something out. There's another game called Tiebreak Tennis, and it advertises itself as the official game of the ATP and WTA, and they have a much bigger player roster, and they have the bigger names signing on with them. And part of me wonders if they're not signing on with Topspin because it's made by 2K. So Topspin doesn't have Novak Djokovic, doesn't have Rafael Nadal, doesn't have probably, 10 or 15 of the players that this Tiebreak game has. And it's made by a smaller studio. It's made by Big Ant Studios, right? Novak Djokovic signed on with Tiebreak, with Big Ant Studios. So did Rafael Nadal. They are having a mode in that game dedicated to Novak Djokovic's biggest Grand Slam moments. Their cover stars are Coco Gauff and Novak Djokovic, and they had Coco Gauff in the studio recently doing animations, interviews, etc. And the accuracy on the serves and all of their hitting motions in that game, while the gameplay is rough, those pieces, like the motion capture and the animation quality in that regard, is unbelievably accurate. Probably the most accurate I've ever seen in a tennis video game. But why are these players signing on with such a small developer, right? You got to wonder. Because Topspin is missing the majority of the big names. They have a much smaller player roster. So I also want to point out that Troyden, who all of us know, he came up in MyTEAM. That's where he gained most of his following. And he's pushing 1 million followers on Twitter, Andrew, 776,000 at this point. He stated, NBA 2K has been in a slow downfall every year since LD2K was removed as community manager. What the hell is actually going on over there? Who is making these calls? He's talking about the Kobe. He's obviously a big Kobe fan as well. And he states, why are people not fired? How are you going to swap out the Kobe collection reward one day before people could obtain it? WTF. Somebody needs to spill the beans. A terrible look, again, for the company.
The lack of a proper community manager. I mean, obviously, that's not the community manager's decision to put in all these microtransactions. It's not something they can stop. But it just goes back to that lack of communication with the community, that lack of respect for their user base, people who are willingly dumping all this money into the game year after year, and you can't even be honest with them. Yeah, it's just gross. And speaks to their failure to communicate, as I've written about before, as we've talked about on the show so many times, how frustrating it is. And yeah, it is interesting that these big names in tennis are signing on with that smaller studio. Does it suggest that they don't want to be associated with those kinds of practices?
Yeah, and that's what I think. Like, I think there'd be no other reason, right? Because they're not going to get as much exposure with Tiebreak, right? With that other smaller studio game.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at NBA-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So, Andrew, let's get to our main topic, the most overused words and or terminology in basketball jargon. And like I stated at the onset of the show, this topic suggestion came from Kid Cash, and so we appreciate him for that. But I'll kick this one off. Evolution, Andrew. It is thrown around constantly, and the majority of the time when people say it, they are saying it in the wrong context. They're saying it in a way that doesn't make sense. They're using it improperly. So, apparently everything gets better with time, according to a lot of the younger generation, and that their era is superior in every way. Nothing from the past can be better to this crowd due to quote unquote evolution. However, they can never expand on what has evolved to be better. All they say is advancements and things get better with time, right?
Human evolution doesn't work that way. Just put that out there.
It doesn't work that way. That's why Larry Nance, by the way, in the 80s, in like 1984, could have his head at the rim, his elbow way above the rim, throwing it down. If human evolution worked the way that you guys are saying it does, players today should have their hip at the rim, Andrew, right?
Yeah.
They should be jumping higher. They should be running faster, et cetera. But you notice none of that's happened, even though there's 40 years that separate somebody like Larry Nance and somebody today like John Collins, right? But like I said, they can never expand on what has evolved to be better. So other than at times trying to state that players are supposedly more athletic, have more of a bag, and shoot more threes today. But players are more fragile than ever today, despite the supposed evolution in quote unquote medicine, which people use loosely as well and never actually apply it correctly to, the point they're trying to make. Injuries are at an all-time high. There are plenty of examples of players in the 80s, like I stated, Larry Nance getting his elbow above the rim, getting his head at the rim on dunks, but somehow this is inferior to today's players. Nobody can explain how it's inferior, Andrew, because it's not, but supposedly it's inferior, just because of evolution. So, like I stated, shouldn't today's players have their chest at rim level if that's the case? Human evolution doesn't work that way, as you stated. And about the evolution of big men shooting threes, they don't commonly have the same quality in the mid-range, post, or around the rim game as so many past bigs. Not knowing how to use their strength to an advantage, not knowing how to use length in mismatches, etc. So how is that a positive in today's game?
Yeah.
It's not. It's a negative. In fact, it just makes it so the game has less variety and actually gives offenses less ways to attack. Because if you're saying this guy can go out and shoot threes, right, this big guy, the majority of the time they're not shooting a very great percentage, right? They're shooting probably in the mid-low 30s at the highest, and some of them shooting in the 20 to 30% range. There's a couple of exceptions like Jokic, right? He shoots a very high percentage as a true big guy in the NBA. But the majority of the bigs today don't know how to face up well in the high post, or rarely do. They don't have a strong mid-range game because they didn't grow up practicing it. They're not tough inside, and they're not great around the rim. So they may be able to step out and hit a three every now and then, but what makes them a better offensive player?
Well,
that doesn't make sense.
I mean, there is a certain irony, obviously, in calling them better shooters and saying they have unlimited range when there's limitations within the three-point arc. They don't have that shooting touch inside or at the mid-range, as you said. So it's not like you can say, they can hit from anywhere. Well, they can hit from outside, but they can't hit from inside the arc, which makes them kind of ineffective or less effective than players with that larger repertoire, that better shooting touch from more spots on the floor. Absolutely. And that's one of my big ones, obviously, as well. Anything that disparages past eras, the false narratives, Michael Jordan couldn't go left, things like that. Things that sound like a clever gotcha, they sound like a clever revelation about the past, but it's just complete nonsense. That is, and all of the gotchas and jargon that go along with that. And positionless basketball is a big one. And the funny thing is that people were talking about the Phoenix Suns, who just got swept by the Minnesota Timberwolves, saying they need a point guard. Well, if this is positionless basketball, Derek, why do you need a point guard? So there is
right. And what did their offense lack, Andrew?
Playmaking.
Their offense lacked variety. They had no ways of attacking if they weren't knocking down their outside shot. There was zero. They had no way to exploit mismatches. They had no way to attack, no way to confidently put up points outside of, just hoping that their shots were falling. And like you said, positionless basketball, there isn't one player on that floor on the Suns that properly can run point. Yeah. Right? There is not one player on that. It's certainly nobody in the big three on that team can, run a basketball team. So yeah, miss me with that BS. I also want to point something out really quick. Rules in the past prevented players from carrying the ball and traveling like they do today. All the way up until the Iverson era, players had to mostly keep their hand on top of the ball, which is why crossovers look odd and sometimes inferior to today. In the early 90s and prior, the focus of basketball was to get the highest percentage shot, which is why bigs were so coveted, and getting as close to the rim to score as possible was considered the most efficient way to play, which, by the way, I still believe it still is, Andrew. How many teams have we seen shoot themselves out of games and lose playoff series? Look no further than Houston missing 27 threes in a row to drop that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's I still think it's the most efficient way to play. But back then, that's why the mid-range, post, and around the rim game was so prominent. And that's why players were so much more confident in those areas back then. But people don't want to hear that because that's context. Right? So that's context around, quote unquote, what they talk about in relation to, what has evolved and what hasn't in basketball. So, I watched street ball film of Earl Monroe in the 70s, and because he was allowed to, carry like today's players, his dribbling looked incredibly similar to some of the best ball handlers today. So, just miss me with all of the BS. Human evolution doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Basketball evolution hasn't worked that way. All of that. So, yeah, it's complete BS.
And I mean, look at two of the most dominant players today, Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic. Not freak athletes, obviously. Tremendous basketball IQ, tremendously skilled. And that translates in any era.
And Doncic, what is he allowed to do, Andrew? He is allowed to move like no players were allowed to move in the 90s and earlier. He is allowed to take gather steps. He's allowed to take like 3 steps into a 3, hop sideways, hop backwards. He is allowed to carry. He is allowed to carry on crossovers, on hesitations. He is allowed to move like nobody from the 90s and like earlier were allowed to move. So how is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, I did see a comment on X about if there's anything that's changed in the modern game, it's a focus on people trying to make their game more aesthetically pleasing. But of course, that does come down to allowing those street ball and one-like moves in the NBA setting, that you can make these flashy moves that involve carries or travels or things like that, double dribble. So it's if you allow players to get away with that, then obviously they can do some spectacular things that would be violations in previous eras. So that is like to your point, context that people don't bring up. But yeah, positionless basketball is a big one for me in evolution, obviously. And to that point, when they talk about big men dribbling like a guard, and there are big men who are allowed to dribble more often these days and bring the ball up court. Bam Adebayo, Nikola Jokic, obviously, but they do not dribble like guards. You do not see them put the ball on the floor like a Kyrie Irving, like an Allen Iverson, like any of the great dribblers, a Bob Cousy. You don't see that fancy dribbling. And Bob Cousy was still pretty fancy back in the day, just to put it out there. Look at some footage of him, what he was able to do with those restrictive rules, with those more restrictive rules. You don't see them dribbling quite that well. They dribble very confidently, but at their size, they can't handle like a guard. And this is actually one that goes beyond the current era as well. I've heard this over the years, and there are very few taller players, big players, that dribble like guards. I mean, you do have Magic Johnson, one of the tallest point guards ever, obviously. LeBron James, although I think his ball handling is overrated at times. LeBron is much closer to Allen Iverson than Jokic is, as far as being able to dribble in a fancy way and handle a ball and not look kind of awkward with it, because he's a bit shorter than Jokic and other big men who can supposedly dribble like a guard. But yeah, just the fact that they're allowed to dribble a little bit more. I mean, we saw Hakeem do it, we saw Ewing, we saw even Shaq do it. David Robinson, they could handle the ball just as well as a Jokic. They weren't allowed to do it as often, or they weren't called upon to do it as often, but none of them at that size can truly, quote-unquote, dribble like a guard.
Well, I got to point out, LeBron's dribbling has never been excellent. I know you're comparing him in a one-on-one sphere to Jokic, but he's always been his fancy dribbling has never been his forte either.
Not a fan of the crab dribble?
No, I'm not a fan of the crab dribble. I do want to point out, though, that if you have somebody sent at Bam Adebayo when he's bringing up the ball, he has to pick up his dribble.
Oh, yeah.
If you send a defender at Kevin Durant, even watch when PJ Tucker, when he was against him, I want to say it was last year's postseason, whenever Kevin Durant tried to bring up the ball and then PJ Tucker came up on him, what did Durant do? He picked up the ball immediately. Why? Because he's not a point guard. He doesn't have those type of handles, right? He can't protect the ball and dribble out of that situation when he's pressured as a ball handler. Same thing with guys like Giannis. Giannis is not a strong ball handler. If you pressure Giannis appropriately, he has to pick up the ball because he doesn't have that type of handle. So I think a lot of times people are like, oh my God, look, Wembanyama, he brought up the ball and then he attacked the rim or he kicked it to the perimeter. Right. But I saw Ralph Sampson do the same thing when he wasn't pressured. Right?
Sean Kemp, yeah.
Ralph Sampson was 7'4". Sean Kemp did the same thing. We saw Shaq push it full court. We've had bigs in the past do that constantly. Sam Perkins in the 80s with Dallas. You had countless big men from the past that were able to push the ball down the middle of the floor or
Russell.
dribble when there wasn't pressure. Right. Bill Russell's another one, Wilt Chamberlain, etc. Bob Pettit and whatnot. So, yeah, that is just all, again, just them trying to do whatever they possibly can to say that things are better, things have gotten better with time, and that this product is better. And I just find it to be complete BS. So what word or terminology do you want to bring up next?
So here's one that's always kind of bothered me throughout the years, actually. Good stats on a bad team. And look, there is some merit to it. If you look at expansion clubs over the years, I know if I mention the name Chris King, Derek, you'll know Chris King from back in the day. bench warmer for most of his career, gets expansion drafted to the Grizzlies, is suddenly putting up numbers. He has the opportunity. But the reason I don't like that dismissive term, good stats on a bad team, is that you still have to go against NBA competition. He's still putting up against the same competition as everybody else. Maybe the opportunities are there. Maybe he wouldn't have those opportunities if there was a better player to play ahead of him in the rotation, to start ahead of him and play ahead of him. But good stats on a bad team, if you can get into the NBA and put up good stats, you know, you've got some skill. And I find it very dismissive. And one player can only do so much, right? I mean, there is a reason that Michael Jordan's Bulls, the first few Bulls teams that he was on, couldn't get past the first round. He was carrying a lot of the load. He didn't have the help that all great players need. To that point, there's a reason that Magic Johnson was a champion in his rookie year. Larry Bird and Tim Duncan in their second years. You land on a team that has a bit more talent there, you can go a bit further. Good stats on a bad team, it's just so dismissive of great players and even just capable players who are going up against the same competition as everybody else. I've never been a big fan of the good stats on a bad team narrative.
I think the only thing I could say about this is I think the skill of the player still matters in the conversation.
Sure.
Right, like that needs to be talked about. And, you know, how were they able to achieve those stats? And sure, their stats may go down when they go to a different team that's more stacked. Maybe their role changes. Maybe instead of being the number one, they're the number three, right? Or something like that. But do those skills translate into being a above average player in the league, right? So like in a case, and I brought this up before, in a case like Don McLean, who played for an absolutely terrible Washington Bullets team, and I think he averaged 18 points a game that year. Did his skills translate to him being, you know, this, you know, above average, really good NBA player? I don't think so. So there's sometimes cases where there's good stats on a bad team where you could say that and kind of find some backup for it. Based on discussing that player's skill, based on, you know, what they did following that season, right? When things changed slightly and whatnot. And was there a big drop off? All of that. But at the same time, I think it's used too often to basically kind of crap on a player who is absolutely a good player and who finally got an opportunity to get minutes, and he proved that, hey, against the best basketball players in the world, I can put up some good numbers.
I remember it being used against Sharif Abdur-Rahim back in the day when he was on some terrible Grizzlies teams, and he was a not top flight player, not top level player. I think he was an all-star at least once or twice from memory, but he was a quality player, one of the best players in that famous draft class of 1996. The top player? No. That's your Kobe's. That's your Allen Iversons. The top players in that particular draft class. Ray Allen, Stephon Marbury, obviously. Sharif was up there as, I want to say, the third pick, and maybe he wouldn't go third if you were doing that draft over today. In fact, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't. But I heard them say good stats on a bad team then, and I always thought that underrated him. So he's the kind of player I think of when people say that. But also, you know, to the point of the Grizzlies, someone like a Chris King, it kind of makes a bit more sense. But at the same time, you're still doing it against NBA competition. So it's a bit dismissive in my view.
Like a guy like Devon Harris, when he averaged about 20 points per game on a subpar Nets team, and, you know, he had got the opportunity to do a little bit more on offense, handle the ball more and whatnot. And then you saw his drop off, right?
Yeah.
In his career after that. I don't think that Devon Harris was ever as good as his numbers showed that season, but he was still able to put those numbers up against NBA competition. So you still got to give him credit for that. Yeah, and he was always a solid player, right? Which is why Dallas wanted him back towards the end of his career, right?
Yeah.
So I'll go next, Andrew. Advancements in technology. That's one of the big ones. How often do we hear people say, well, today's players are better because of advancements in technology? So basically, the point they try to make sometimes is that if a player from decades ago had access to the technology they speak of, which they never expand on, they could have been better. So I guess I just want to know what advancements they're talking about, because this is used incredibly loose. Is it, you know, the shoes? I mean, the past players showed incredible skill and athleticism with what they had at the time. What else? You know, what is the average basketball player, or hey, you know, like advanced basketball player using today that was not used in the past? Right? Like in the past, they had everything they needed. They had the gym, they had weights, a court, a ball. You know, they had supplements back then. cones, chairs, tennis balls to throw up against a wall, like you often see guys like Draymond Green doing and whatnot,
Brooms.
Gym items for balance, ropes, etc. Machines. The hoop was the same height, court the same size, ball the same size and weight. If David Thompson could skywalk and stop on a dime and smoke jump shots in the 70s, what was he missing from today's technology, right? What was going to change David Thompson being able to be elite at those things and better than so many players today from an athletic standpoint and skill standpoint? If Daryl Dawkins could get his elbow at the rim and tear down backboards in the 70s and early 80s, what else would he need today, right? What exactly do you think these kids are doing today that players didn't or couldn't do from the past? You know what they're doing? They're playing basketball today, just like those players from the past. At times they're hitting the gym and using machines, just like those players from the past. What else are they doing? They're putting on basketball shoes, just like they did from the past. You know, maybe they use cones or chairs. Do you think that's new? Like using cones and chairs, is that new technology?
Shooting over brooms?
What do you think that all these kids today are sitting in cryo chambers and that's making them superhuman or something? Like, it doesn't make any sense. When people say advancements in technology and use it so loosely, it's the same thing as evolution. They're not applying any context to it. They're just saying everything is better today.
It
right?
sounds good, but it's not true.
Yeah. But I'm sorry, but all of the proof I need is watching big guys like Dave Cowens from the 70s, Dawkins, 70s, early 80s, guys like David Thompson, all the super skilled players, the Rick Barrys of the world, and like Isaiah Thomas and all of these guys. Like, all I need to do is watch that footage and watch the speed, the jumping ability, the stop on a dime shooting ability, the around the rim work, the post work, the mid-range work. That's all I need to see to know that your advancements in technology BS argument is just that. It's BS. So advancements in technology is one of my worst hated uses in basketball discussion.
I mean, we all know that shoe technology peaked with the Reebok pumps. That is a scientific fact, obviously.
Made you jump higher. That's not true.
Absolutely.
We want to think.
We saw it happen. We saw the ads with D. Brown. Absolutely. You know, I absolutely agree. The only thing that I can think of that technology has improved is medical technology, and only then when there is a serious injury. I think there are injuries that back in the day were probably career killers or very career altering, that these days they've developed new techniques with surgical procedures that perhaps make it less, that perhaps reduce that possibility of having the same impact, or it's not the same career killer that it once was. Some of the knee injuries or Achilles injuries that were, although that's not to say the players didn't come back from them. Obviously, I mean, Dominic Wilkins, when as soon as I said Achilles, I thought of Dominic Wilkins coming back as strong as ever. So it's not a case of players couldn't, but some things that were possibly career killers, there are some new procedures there. But again, that's only if they get injured.
I got to point something out. Injuries are at an all-time high since 2018.
Well, that as well.
Every year, load management is at an all-time high. Players spraining their ankles, breaking their ankles, having all of these like crazy injuries and everything. Just the sheer volume of injuries are at an all-time high. But apparently, we have medical advancements, right?
I mean,
do you understand? Yeah. Do you understand why? Listen, I completely agree with you. I think with things like major surgeries, things like, ACL repair, right?
Yeah.
You're talking to somebody who just had an ACL.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
I did a ton of research on this. Trust me, I get it. They've leaps and bounds better understanding, right, of how to treat an ACL injury, MCL, PCL.
I think they've stopped the microfracture surgery, haven't they? They've stopped that because they found that wasn't as effective.
Right. It was, the result was not what it should have been, basically. But yeah, for the major injuries, sure. But as far as, are injuries down? Hell no. They're way up.
Yeah.
We have less players. Non-contact injuries are skyrocketing. We have more players than ever not able to play 82 games. Hell, we only have a few players in the entire league of over 300 to 400 players that hit 82 games now. There used to be well over 100, right, that effortlessly hit 82 games, sometimes for consecutive seasons. Even a guy like Ralph Sampson at 7'4" played 82 games his first 3 seasons, right? So, yes, I agree that for major surgeries, the advancements are 100% noticeable. And look no further than me, who just had ACL reconstruction. But at the same time, we have players dropping like flies today and having to rest more than ever and whatnot. But again, outside of the major surgeries, like you had talked about, where are the advancements in technology that would make players from the past that much better, or that would make players today that supposedly make today's players better than past players? I have seen all the footage I need to know that that's BS. So what's your next one?
So this is another one that has persisted throughout the years, makes his teammates better. And look, there are obviously ways you can argue that certain players have made their teammates better, or they've opened up opportunities for their teammates, or they've taken the pressure off their teammates, and great players certainly do that. But it's one of those things that's always thrown out there to say, oh, this guy is much better than that guy because he makes his teammates better. Like as if he magically bestows talent and skill upon his teammates, just casts his gaze over them, and with a flash of his eyes, they are magically 10 times the player they were, and it reflects back on him, and he's suddenly 10 times better himself. And I'm sure that Nick Wright has said this about LeBron James in the past. That's probably where I heard it. But it's one of those things it's such a nothing jargon phrase, and it's used so indiscriminately. It's used to pump up players, to suggest that some players weren't great playing with Michael Jordan, or that it didn't make their job easier, that it didn't give them more open shots or whatever because his assist numbers weren't as high. It's just ridiculous. And you also look at the system that players play in. The ball movement of the triangle versus the put it in the dominant ball handler's hands and let them go to work. Different systems, different assist numbers, obviously. And yeah, it's just jargon.
We're going to disagree a little bit here. I think that making their teammates better, there's some obvious ones. I think you saw, Allen Iverson is one of my favorite players of all time, right? You saw what the Nuggets did in 07-08 with Iverson out in the first round, underperformed. And then immediately in 08-09, they got Chauncey Billups, who absolutely made his teammates better. They had almost the exact same roster from the previous year, went to the Western Conference Finals. And you could tell watching those games that the players had more trust in Chauncey Billups as a distributor. He would find them coming off screens where Iverson would not find them. He had stronger shot selection and whatnot. So I do think that there's actually a lot of cases I could think of in NBA history where there was a point guard switch, but the team stayed relatively the same, but there was a huge boost in performance because that point guard did indeed get the best out of his teammates. It's the difference between somebody like Larry Bird for the Boston Celtics and somebody like Tom Chambers on those Seattle Sonics and Suns 80s teams.
Sure.
Right? Sure. Larry Bird. Yeah. So Larry Bird made everybody better, a much better passer than Chambers, trusted his teammates in turn trusted him. He got the players the ball where they wanted to. He had the touch passes, all of that stuff. He worked harder than Tom Chambers on the boards and whatnot, which automatically gains trust and gets your team motivated and everything. And then you had Tom Chambers, who had all the talent in the world, Andrew, right? Good shooter, could step out and hit the three just like Larry. Was more athletic of a player than Larry Bird, had a little bit bigger. He was bigger than Bird, but he never could have the impact in making his teammates better that Bird did. And what happened? Chambers never won anything, right? At the highest level. He never, outside of, when he was getting older, making it to the finals with the Suns in 92, 93 and whatnot, he wasn't able to do what Bird did. And he had some really strong supporting casts throughout his career. Those late 80s Suns teams were excellent from a talent perspective. So I think you can make examples in where a player, proved that he could make his teammates better at the same position as another player who faltered.
No, I do see the point there. I mean, I'm also thinking of Allen Iverson obviously carrying the 76ers to the finals in 2001. You mentioned, obviously, the 93 finals, but people don't talk about Charles Barkley making his teammates better, even though he came to that Suns team. But that's the thing. That's kind of my point as well. Is I see, obviously, there is ways that playing with a great player who is able to open up opportunities and distribute and so forth. And, you obviously bring up some great examples there. But it seems to be only applied to players that people want to pump up, because there's been a lot of stars that have made their teammates
right, like
better.
LeBron.
Yeah.
Right, like LeBron. Like they talk about how they try to say that, well, he's a pass-first player. No, the hell he is not.
All-time leading scorer.
LeBron has never been a pass-first. Yeah, he has never. Well, he's not even. Let's say that wasn't even in the picture. You can't be that ball dominant and take that many shots and be a pass-first player. Like, it's impossible. And he hasn't been a pass-first player even from his first days in the league. Go back and watch the early game footage and whatnot. He is a shot-first player. Any comparison to Magic Johnson with LeBron is super insulting. I absolutely hate it. They are not even close to the same types of player. Magic was not a ball dominant point guard. It was get up and go. It was find the best opportunity as immediately when it presented itself. It was ball movement, body movement, etc. So yeah, I just like, but they use that with LeBron. I agree with you. They say, well, he makes his teammates better, right? He makes his teammates better. He's a pass-first player. And like I said, the pass-first thing, in my opinion, doesn't hold any water.
Yeah, I guess that's how I'd clarify it, is that it seems like people use it as this unique quality when it really could be said of a lot of great players, and even some very good ones as well.
No, 100% I agree. So my next one, Andrew, is he's a 3-level scorer. How often are we hearing that today? Yeah. 3-level scorer, because they're trying to use that for evolution. I think 3-level scorer is one of the most overused and more often than not inaccurate jargon in the basketball discussion space. From what I have seen, it's been used for any player who can shoot a 3 or has been seen to be hitting a 3. Someone will say, well, he's better. He's a 3-level scorer. But the guy shoots below league average from 3. Oftentimes shoots a poor percentage from mid-range and rarely gets to the rim. But he's considered, quote unquote, advanced somehow just because he can do all 3 sometimes. It's like saying somebody like Al Horford is more skilled than Akeem Olajuwon because he shot 3s. This actually happened. I think you remember it, Andrew. A roster maker in the 2K community made a list of big men he thought were more skilled than Akeem Olajuwon, and he listed Al Horford.
Yeah. I remember that.
Hakeem didn't take 3s, but was far more skilled in every aspect of the game inside the 3-point line than Al Horford. He was also a far more coordinated, stronger, and overall athletic player. So yeah, I'll keep this one short. The 3-level scorer stuff is mostly BS.
To me, it sounds like a 2K, my career, my player build name. Whenever people start using video game terminology like that to talk about real players, oh, he's a 99 overall in 2K. Well, great, so has been some of my players over the years. It doesn't make me a star. But when we use that kind of terminology to analyze real basketball, it's just silly. I agree.
I swear people think real basketball is 2K sometimes. I swear. Before I get into my last one, do you have another one?
I have a couple that I'll throw out real quick, and it kind of crosses over with some of the things we've talked about before. Efficiency, or the focus on efficiency, is one of my big pet peeves as well, because it does come down to the era, the style of play. There have been players who have won without being efficient. There have been players who have lost while being efficient. And you know which one I'll take, Derek? The player who wins with stats that the advanced metrics say are inefficient over the player that gets these eye-popping efficiency numbers but doesn't lead their team to victory. What is the stat that matters at the end of the day? The W. Winning championships, winning games. So efficiency is very overrated in my view. I mean, certainly it's not great to be inefficient, but there have been some eras in the NBA that have been less efficient than others because they weren't focusing on that. So efficiency is one of my pet peeves for sure. And bus driver is not a bad analogy. I think it started out as a good one, but like everything else in modern discourse, the bus metaphor has missed some stops, if you will. The bus is broken down. It's just way overused to dismiss players or pump them up. And in that similar vein, washed. It's always an exaggeration that can be proven wrong. So again, just to pump up players, oh, you said he was washed. No, we didn't. We said he was slightly past his prime. Not washed, not terrible, but you've made that exaggeration so that you can knock down that straw man argument. So those are some that come to mind that really bug me in the discourse because they're such bad faith arguments, ad hominems, straw man arguments. Yeah, they just bug me.
Stats without context is king in basketball discussion. And the reason is because it makes even the person who, might not know a lick about basketball, never touched a basketball, never played the sport in general, it can get them involved, right? Because they look at basketball on a spreadsheet. And what they see is they can say, oh, well, this person led this team in scoring and this person averaged 5 points per game. So that guy who averaged 5 points a game was trash, terrible help. And that guy couldn't have possibly helped this team. So he had a terrible supporting cast because he had these guys that averaged 11 points a game or 8 points a game. But I can guarantee you that 99% of the people who talk like that about basketball know nothing about the play style of that player. They don't know how he impacted the game positively or negatively. They don't know his skill set. They don't understand how that player was used and why he was used that way, how it worked in the construct of that team, etc. So stats are king in sports, but specifically basketball, I'll say, because it allows everybody from the person who knows nothing about basketball to somebody who is incredibly advanced in their knowledge of basketball to spout off talking points and be involved in the discussion. And unfortunately, the majority of people who do talk hoop that I've seen talk hoop and who spew all the, stats without context and try to get involved in basketball discussion, the majority of those people are on that low end of actual basketball knowledge. And unfortunately, sometimes those people dominate the most popular accounts on YouTube and social media, etc. So I got one more, Andrew. Quote unquote two-way player used constantly. I remember watching the Celtics and the broadcast team was calling Romeo Langford a gifted two-way player. My first thought was, and this is obviously Romeo Langford's no longer with the Celtics, this is when he was with them. My first thought was, doesn't he need to be a good offensive player to be considered a two-way player? Otherwise, can we just call anybody a two-way player? He also wasn't strong on defense with Boston either. He was always getting pushed around and consistently, he was consistently out of position. But he was 6'5", 216 with a good wingspan.
Only ran the court both ways. I mean, he went two ways up and down the court. That's something, I guess. Yeah,
there you go. Two-way player. Everybody's a two-way player then.
Apparently.
They try to make it seem like every single guy around that height with a good wingspan is a dependable two-way player, even if they are subpar on one or both sides of the ball. And so I think two-way player is used incorrectly the majority of the time. The other thing that I hate is it's been used in the evolution argument where they're like, well, we have more two-way players today. We have more players with longer wingspans. We have more players that can light it up offensively and then also, be more versatile on defense. And they're acting like the idea of an actual two-way player is a new thing. That is absolute. Since the beginning of basketball, I will say it, since the beginning of basketball, you have had two-way players who were good on offense and good on defense. This isn't anything new.
No, I absolutely agree. And once again, there is a legitimate use of that term. If you're talking about these players who are tremendous defenders and tremendous offensive players, and we can certainly name many historical examples, as you said, but yeah, it's just another one of those ones that's used so indiscriminately that it stops making sense. It's overused jargon.
Exactly.
But yeah, those are the things that bug us the most when it comes to overused basketball jargon, terminology that's used indiscriminately or inaccurately, shall we say. But let's see what the community had to say about this topic. And Bucky T says he plays like MJ or is the next Jordan. The GOAT MJ is in a class of his own. And obviously I agree with that. I feel that you probably feel similarly about that as well. And it takes me back, Derek, to those comparisons in the 90s where they said anybody who could walk and chew gum at the same time was compared to Michael Jordan. Deshaun Stevenson may be one of the most hilarious on, I think it was NBA DraftNet back in the day, saying that he might be the next MJ. Deshaun Stevenson. Now, Deshaun Stevenson did win the title with the Mavericks, and made a couple of big shots in that series, but not the next MJ.
No, I believe Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time. I think he's the most skilled player I have ever seen, regardless of any accolades. A two-way player, how about that? I think that even if he had never won a championship, I would say openly, honestly, he is the most skilled basketball player I have ever seen. I think the GOAT debate is BS. And the biggest reason why it's BS is because they center it around two players, a current player and a past player. They do LeBron James versus Michael Jordan. And somehow Magic Johnson, who won 5 championships and made 9 finals in 13 seasons and put up ridiculous numbers and was the ultimate floor general and whatnot, somehow he's not allowed to be part of it. Media will never include him as part of it. Larry Bird, 3 MVPs in a row, 3 championships in the 80s, just all-around skill set, ridiculous talent. He's not allowed to be in the discussion. Bill Russell, 11 championships, not allowed to be in this discussion, never talked about it on any of the media outlets in this discussion. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the most accomplished college basketball player of all time, but also one of the most accomplished NBA players, big men or not, he's not allowed to be in this discussion. Kobe Bryant, 5 NBA championships, he's not allowed to be in this discussion. So the GOAT debate in itself is so exhausting because it's obvious what the media is doing. It's, keeping people's eyes on the current game. It's including one current player, and it's keeping the conversation to only 2 players. And by keeping it to only 2 players, it makes everybody be able to be involved, everybody to feel like they can get involved, making everybody feel like they can be a subject matter expert because they only have to focus on 2 players, etc. So I absolutely hate it. And I don't care if you think LeBron James is the greatest of all time or if you think Magic Johnson is or Kareem or Kobe or anything. If that's your opinion, that's fine. And if you have facts that you can use to back that up and, context and everything, all the better. But yeah, this GOAT debate is BS.
People don't always have the facts or the stats, but they do have the jargon, which is kind of the point that we're getting at here. Stephen, the Live King, to your point, says he's a two-way player just because he's 6'6", LOL. And yeah, that is, as we said, just a very shallow comparison. Somebody makes a couple of plays at both ends, and they are in that they're in that classic swingman build, so they're just called a two-way player. Roger Ward, one of the Live One legends, of course, says raw talent and high upside. So they're not good yet? Cool. And yeah, that's one we hear a lot around draft time.
Yeah, the raw talent, high upside thing is interesting because when you're a basketball fan and you've watched basketball all your life, and then you see that player hit the floor and they just look completely lost and they can't buy a bucket even if they're completely wide open, they can't fit into the team construct and everything, you start to wonder, how high is this guy's upside, right? But they like to promote a lot of players who are not that talented as a player with like a super high upside. So I definitely see where Roger is coming from.
I think for a while there it was almost a drinking game with the draft with Hubie Brown saying the word potential. That was a joke that was made a few times back in the day. And it definitely was a very popular buzzword in the early 2000s when high school players were still eligible for the draft.
Well, shout out to Hubie Brown, though, being in his 90s and still in the booth.
Oh, for sure.
And still sounding as sharp as ever. And I think that he is old school in all of the best ways because he does connect with the younger audience, and he still, tries to break down the game like we talked about on the past show, like, great commentators of the past, like guys like Mike Fratello and Doug Collins and everything. Hubie Brown's a treasure. So, yeah, he's great.
Kid Cash, who brought up this topic, obviously, says positionless basketball, which is never really true, and get after it.
Yeah, positionless basketball is one of the worst. And if you actually look throughout the NBA, the positions are clearly defined on pretty much every single team, right? Trae Young's a point guard. He's not playing center, right? John Collins is a power forward. And oftentimes, if he's matched up at center, he gets bullied and pushed around and whatnot by bigger centers who are playing their position, right? You have guys like Plumlee out there. What is he, Andrew? He's a power forward center. Like sometimes if teams want to go big, he'll play power forward. But he has absolutely no skill, no ability to play any other position than those two positions. You still have DeAndre Jordan in the league, straight up center. Alex Len, straight up center. Like you have your shooting guards that can't play point guard, guys like Bradley Beal, right? What is he? He's a shooting guard through and through. It's the only position that Bradley Beal can play. Yeah, good luck putting Jaylen Brown at point guard, Andrew.
Yeah.
Do you know what would happen to the Celtics if you tried to put Jaylen Brown at point guard? Yeah, the positionless basketball thing is all BS. The roles are clearly defined on teams, often by height, just like it was back in the day, right? And whatnot. So, yeah, I completely agree with Kid Cash.
Skill sets and natural advantage. Absolutely. It's still a thing. It's just the way basketball works. It's an inherent part of the sport, for sure. Kid Cash also says, not sure if this counts, but whenever NBA players are on podcasts, they love to claim basketball wasn't even my best sport. I just heard Darius Baisley claim he could have been an MLS goalie, but he isn't the only one. I have heard that a couple of times. Players saying it wasn't even my best sport, but that's what they ended up with.
I heard that with Allen Iverson, too, because he was a quarterback in high school. And there was actually people who vouched for it that said that Allen Iverson, his best sport was actually football. And then I heard the opposite, actually, from commentary for Randy Moss. There were some people saying that Randy Moss's best sport wasn't even football, that it was actually basketball. And if you remember correctly, he played high school ball with Jason Williams. So, yeah, it is interesting. I do think that it gets old, though, especially if you don't see proof.
Yeah.
Right? If there's no proof in the pudding. I know that there's been some good two-sport stars, people like Danny Ainge, who played for the Toronto Blue Jays, was far from a star with the Blue Jays, but obviously had an unbelievable NBA career with the Celtics, then Sacramento, then Portland, then Phoenix, and whatnot. And apparently Tom Brady was one hell of a baseball player. Apparently he was drafted into Major League Baseball, but obviously became arguably the greatest football player of all time. So, and obviously Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders. There's a lot of examples of two or three sport athletes.
Game Face Incorporated says a for sure Hall of Famer, and he doesn't expand on that point any further. I'm guessing it's kind of an exaggeration, or perhaps it doesn't mean as much because a lot of players who are not necessarily top level do get into the Hall of Fame for one reason or another, or simply that it's just stating the obvious, I guess.
I think it's more along the lines of staying the obvious, like saying something's a surefire Hall of Famer. That's what I hear the most. Do we really need to hear that about like Chris Paul?
Yeah.
Like, sure, he didn't win a title, but yeah, he's a Hall of Fame
obviously
player. Like, obviously, like Kevin Durant, surefire Hall of Famer. No crap, right? So I think it's just the overuse of it.
And jumping over to our Facebook page now, JV says, Killer Instinct, feel for the game, and the recent one that I hate so much, bag, as in this player has a great bag or this player doesn't have a bag.
Yeah, how many times I heard that Jordan Poole had a bag and it made him elite and it separated him from past players, and that if Jordan Poole displayed his bag in today's game in the 80s, he would be, executed for witchcraft and stuff like that. Jordan Poole is not a star. He is not an all-star caliber player. He is out of control the majority of the time. That bag that you're discussing, sure, he used it every now and then sometimes with the Warriors, and it looked okay and it got him a bucket or two, but it is not the best for the team. It's not the best for him as a player, how often he over dribbles, right? And whatnot, or dribbles out of control. Somebody will see one sweet move that a player pulls off and think that that player is otherworldly and that they can beat anybody off the dribble or they can score whenever they want. That is the furthest thing from the case. And look no further than what happened with Jordan Poole went to the Wizards, right? So, yeah, I absolutely can't stand the, well, he has a bag thing just because you saw somebody execute a crossover once, right? Or go behind the back every now and then, or, be able to get by his guy with a specific move. What you got to think about is how often is he able to do that, right? How often does he have control of the ball? How often, does it help his team when he is dribbling, when he is pulling off moves and whatnot? So yeah, I totally agree about that. The whole bag thing is overused.
Jordan Poole left his bag at the airport, I think, when he went to Washington.
But he still got that bag because every NBA player gets the bag, the money bag, because
go get that bag. Yeah,
the amount of money in the NBA makes a role player a millionaire, even if they never get off the bench. So,
and jumping over to Discord now, Kid Cash has another example in there. Once again mentions get after it. Also mentions making your teammates better, as we covered earlier in the show, and generational talent. Honestly, how many people have we really seen that were generational talents? I think we need to be more cautious when labeling someone with this before it is usually given to people who aren't generational talents. Yeah, definitely jargon that gets thrown around.
They say generational talent before the guy even plays an NBA game, too. I remember they were talking about Zion Williamson being a generational talent. What part of his game was generational outside of him being, a athletic specimen, like being able to, do some windmills at the rim and, that block he had out at the 3-point line where he covered a lot of ground. His athleticism wasn't really generational either, if you really think about it. And if you compare it to, past decades of athletic players or even players that are currently in the NBA, his handle wasn't generational. His shooting certainly wasn't generational. And his size wasn't either. So what made Zion Williamson a generational talent? But I heard that, right? So no, I think that's used a little bit too loosely.
Sounds good as a buzzword. And I think that's what it comes down to with all jargon, really.
Exactly.
To that same point, Carolus XCI says the word talent in general is pretty overused nowadays. And Kenny says, I'm not a fan of basketball IQ. You can say someone makes smart plays without saying it's based on some kind of IQ. Expands and says it's mainly around the term IQ and how flawed IQ testing can be. Admittedly, I've probably used the term before. I just think it's overused. Plus, everyone already said the other ones that he thought would qualify. And I see his point there as well. It makes sense, as he acknowledges, but it's just one of those things that you can just kind of throw out there as a very general compliment of a player.
I want the IQ test for Draymond Green. I want that reading. I want to know it now. I don't know. I do think that that's used loosely. I definitely think that the term talent is used too often. Everybody in the NBA is talented.
Yeah.
Everybody in the NBA is a talent. The majority of the players in the NBA, the large majority, almost every single player was an elite player at their high school or an elite player in AAU, an elite player in college, etc. So, but yeah, the way the word talent is used in basketball discussion is way too loose.
And to Kenny's other point, jargon is something that I guess we're all guilty of using at some point or another. It is a handy way of expressing these thoughts, but it does become very overused to the point of becoming very meaningless.
I agree, 100%. And I think some of the worst ones I'll say for me, again, is the whole use of evolution, the use of advancements in technology. And like, one of the other responses, the, stats without context, Andrew. Right? Like, I think that those three pretty much dominate a lot of basketball discussion. And it's unfortunate because it kind of ruins it for me. Like, I don't want to take part in it the majority of the time. As you noticed, I've backed off from talking basketball on social media in a big way compared to the way I was a few years back.
Absolutely. It just gets tiresome to deal with the jargon and the cliches and the bad faith arguments. And it's one of those things to keep in mind, to not use these cliched phrases, these strawman arguments, this jargon, obviously. And it's something that I'm trying to keep in mind when I talk about basketball or basketball video games, to eliminate them or use them as sparingly as possible. And also to focus more on the positives in so much as building up an era as opposed to tearing it down, explaining why something is better without having to lower the bar. That's something I'm trying to keep in mind when I express my views, but to your point, it's often not worth it on social media because you're just banging your head against the desk because of the stupid jargon and arguments you see.
Exactly. So thank you to the community for responding to our main topic. Prompt, always great responses, Andrew, and the community has knocked it out of the park this year.
Absolutely. We really appreciate the discourse. That being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, we thank you for tuning in, and if you'd like to hear a show without basketball jargon, we invite you to join us again next week, either on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us and, of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So, Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube at D43 and on the NLSC D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X. The NLSC's on X and Facebook at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center, and of course keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.